Albert Breer joining us live. Here we go from Palm Beach. Not a bad place to join us live from. At the NFL owner meetings. Okay, so I've always had a theory on overtime. You want it to be quick. I don't want my defense on the field for another 14 plays. So the NFL has said, okay, both teams now get the ball once. It's going to be 10 minutes. My question is, what if a team gets it, does a 9-minute, 58-second drive and scores? What do you do then? I mean, your takeaway on the new NFL owner change in overtime?
Well, I think there are a couple of factors there. Of course, it won't affect, the playoffs because the playoffs they'll play until they have a winner and a loser. And I think during the regular season, there's the broadcast partners, which I think like to keep these games as close to the window they're prescribed to be in as they can. And then I think there's the element of adding more plays to the game, and that's a health and safety thing, and that was part of the argument against this sort of thing years ago, was that they didn't want to put that much more damage on players. So I think this is a fair compromise, and it does add that element of strategy to it. I think one thing, if you look back, like Bill Belichick always wanted a timed period, right? And the reason he wanted the timed period is because he wanted the clock to be part of the overtime. I think in doing this, you are making the clock part of the overtime, So, I think from a viewership standpoint, 15 might be better because you're getting the full quarter. But, I think when you go to 10 minutes, you're making the clock even a bigger factor. And I think that could add like an interesting element of strategy in how teams approach it. I mean, if you're the receiving team, don't you almost automatically go into the 4-minute offense? I think that's what we're going to be looking at.
Okay, tush push. Packers are very anti-tush push. It's been tabled, meaning they'll do it in mid-May and figure out at the mid-May meetings. What is Green Bay and Matt LaFleur's primary objection to the tush push?
They don't think it's a football play. One thing that was interesting to come from the room now, a couple days ago when they first met on this, Jim Harbaugh and Mike Vrabel brought up some of the holes in the way the rule is written. And the most Harbaugh thing ever, can you put 2 extra guards on the field and line them up behind the guards and push the guards because you're not pushing behind the center? Vrabel asked the same thing. Can you take the quarterback and move him behind the guard and then push him behind the guard? So there are some holes in how the rule is written. Howie Roseman was passionate about this in the room and saying that there's no injury data that says it's more dangerous. The league comes back and says, well, actually, we think based on the posture of the player that this could lead to major head and spine injuries. Not that it hasn't yet, but that certainly is a concern. So, you put all this in, and I think, now how do you rewrite it? And one thing that happened inside the room today, earlier this morning, was Rich McKay, the chair of the competition committee, said, why don't we go back to the 2004 rule, or at least look at that rule and how it was written, and maybe we adopt that. So I think somewhere around 20 teams were in favor of looking at that rule as potentially something that could be the framework of something they vote on in May. And it's interesting, Colin, like when they took the rule out 20 years ago, the reason they took the rule out was because what was happening downfield, and you'll remember this, is there were guys getting pushed into the end zone downfield, and when they'd flag it, it was hard to tell if you had a scrum downfield, whether or not, an offensive player coming in was trying to block the defensive player or push his teammate across the line. So is that less of a concern now? Is there a way to address that and how you write the rule? I think it was just there were too many things on the table and too many concerns to pass it now, but the fact that they're tabling it until May shows the league has a real desire to get something done before the season.
I just saw a headline this morning. Steelers are very comfortable with Mason Rudolph as their starter, and I thought, oh boy, if I was a Steeler fan, that's pretty discouraging. So I have made the argument with Aaron Rodgers that he ideally wanted Minnesota, knew the division, loved the coach, loved Justin Jefferson, and that I think deep down he knows Pittsburgh can't get the O-line right. It's a defensive culture. He's done the East Coast. He'd probably like to drift back to the West. And my guess is I don't think he's stalling or being obnoxious. I don't think deep down he wants to go to Pittsburgh, but I do think he loves football and wants to play and was pretty good last year. What is your vibe on what you're hearing about Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, so my vibe would be I think you're absolutely right that he doesn't want to go out the way that he went out last year. I know he, in coming back from the Achilles, wanted to really appreciate the sport and, rediscover his love for the game. And despite how hard everything was last year on the Jets, I think he did do that to a certain degree. So I think he does want to play. And I think, if you're in his spot, you say, okay, I got 1 year left, you're looking for the perfect place. The perfect place would have been Minnesota. Minnesota wants to get a longer look at J.J. McCarthy. And again, we've been over this before, Colin. If they bring in Sam Darnold or Daniel Jones, that's much different than bringing in Aaron Rodgers, where if you bring in Aaron Rodgers, you are just jamming on the pause button on the J.J. McCarthy era at best. And how do you figure that's going to affect his development? There are a lot of things that go into that. And so I think now it's sort of going through the situation with the Steelers. I think one thing the Steelers have going for them, the young offensive line's gotten better. They also have peers of his on his team that are going to be operating with the same level of urgency, veteran players, guys like T.J. Watt, who will be 31, Minkah Fitzpatrick, who will be 29, Cam Hayward, who I believe is going into his 14th year as an NFL player, DK Metcalf's now on his third contract. This is jumping on a moving train. This is not a team that needs to be lifted up. They've been in the playoffs. They need somebody to come help take them over the top. So ultimately, I think he does wind up there. But I think you're right when you say, this isn't the perfect situation. It's a really good one, and I think that's what he's considering right now.
Okay, it's at West Palm Beach. Looks like the Breakers, if I may guess. There.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty good place.
And I don't normally wear sunglasses. I think it's kind of douchey to wear sunglasses on the air, but it is so bright out here, and I'm not saying that to make anybody back home jealous, but it is so bright out here that it actually hurt my eyes to be sitting.
No, that's okay. So let's wrap it up with this. We've got Cleveland's owners saying, "Yep, swing and a miss on Deshaun." We've got the Giants getting Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. There's a lot of move, and we're all trying to play like Inspector Clouseau and figure out with the clues what's going to happen, who's going to pick a quarterback. And then there's other reports on mock draft people that, Shedeur's dropping out. Well, we know Cam's going 1. The Giants and the Browns, do you believe Shedeur Sanders goes to either Cleveland or the New York Giants? Your thoughts?
If you put a gun to my head today, I would say Abdul Carter at 2 to Cleveland, Travis Hunter at 3 to the Giants. I think the Giants have protected themselves so they don't have to force anything at quarterback. And I do think, the idea of taking Travis Hunter and then maybe a day 2 quarterback where you're not tied to that guy for the next 10 years, but you're taking a shot at it, might work better for them. I think Cleveland could take a similar approach here and maybe working out a trade for Kirk Cousins the Friday after the draft. And it's an interesting thing here. So Jimmy Haslam, J.W. Johnson, and Andrew Berry had dinner on Thursday night in State College, Pennsylvania with Abdul Carter. Kevin Stefanski wasn't there. Kevin Stefanski was actually in Oxford, Mississippi for Jackson Dart's pro day. And the fact that they would take their head coach and put him there in Mississippi rather than sitting down with Carter tells me they're at least thinking about the idea of taking Carter at 2 and either sitting there at 33 and taking one there, or maybe moving into the bottom of the first round and taking one at that point. And I think if you do that, then Cousins comes into play because of the relationship between Stefanski and Cousins. So I think there are a lot of moving pieces with both those teams. My guess right now would be that neither of them take Shedeur, and then it becomes anyone's guess where Shedeur goes. Because like I said to you last week, he's sort of like Bo Nix to me, this year's version of Bo Nix, where last year there were very few teams that had Bo Nix as a first-round pick. He had to find a fit, and he obviously found that in Denver, and no one cares where anybody had him anymore because he played great for the Broncos. I think that's Shedeur this year, where a lot of teams don't look at him as a first-round talent, and he's going to have to find a fit.